Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artists Index. And we are closing in on the old year and looking at a new year just lurking in the shadows. And by the time you hear this podcast, it will be that new year. So with that in mind, I'd like to have our guest, as per usual, introduce themselves, tell us their name, obviously, that's part of the introduction, and spell their name.
Hi, I'm Beth Ann Gallagher. Beth Ann is my first name, Beth space Ann, and my last name Gallagher, Gallagher. I'm a writer and a later in life mom. Lately, my writing's focused on movies, especially classics and silence. I'm also the founder of South Coast Cinemaniacs, which is a classic film club that started operating out of the Millicent Library this fall. They've been wonderful to co-host with of the club. They loan us the space and we get to use their screening license. And
such a deal, as they would say.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Going back, how did you get so taken by movies, films, cinema?
Oh, I've always loved films. My family were film watchers. They shared movies with me from all different eras. And when I'm a Gen Xer, and movies still used to be cheap to show on the regular stations when I was a little kid. So I'd watch them with my parents and my grandparents, and even watched a couple movies with one of my great grandmothers. And there were just classics everywhere. So they didn't seem strange or unusual or hard to see at first. And then as they started getting a little harder to see, American movie classics came along, and they used to focus on classic films. And then in 1994, Turner Classic Movies came along. So I have focused a lot on classics and on silence, but I just love movies in general. And I started wanting to think about them and talk about them and write about them more after I took film classes at UMass Dartmouth. I'm a Fairhaven native, and I did end up going to school locally at UMass Dartmouth as an English major. I specialized in both literature and writing communications. And there, Professor Sorkin was one of the professors offering film classes. And I just started thinking about films in a new way. He introduced me to film theory and some literary theory applied to film as well. And then I took a film class with Professor Thompson there, where we started discussing film more. I didn't really turn to writing about film outside of classes until I moved to California. I used to be a DJ at WSMU as a student and a community member. And so I had a lot of fun doing programming there and broadcasting. And when I moved to a new state and didn't know a lot of people, blogging became my way of kind of broadcasting again and sharing the things I liked and connecting with people and reaching out with people. And it's absolutely amazing because if you go on social media, even if you're not a blogger, you can just make a lot of connections with people over film. And there's a lot of film subcultures out there. There are people who are just focused on silence. There are people focused on classics, people focused on indies, a lot of people who are really trying to build careers as film critics and cultural commentators and all of that. So things like Twitter, things like Instagram, Facebook, going to film festivals. And later something called Letterboxd has also helped connect a lot of film people. So while sometimes it might seem harder to find in day-to-day life, this film culture that used to be just part of everyday life, it's really thrived online and helping people to connect and grow and learn more and share, and people develop careers discussing and writing about it.
Is this part of the new thing as well? Because I remember I was holding on to all my LPs. Three Dog Night, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, the whole nine yards. And I decided, well, they're just sitting here. Everything's available online. Oh, what the heck? I'm going to see how much it's worth. And I went, and I was lucky if I got 50 cents a piece for each album. Within, I don't know, 5 years, those exact same albums, all of a sudden, tenfold, they went up. And I read an article that there was a pressing factory in New Jersey that had been around since day one. And they continued to press for like independent, indies and such. And then all of a sudden there was a surge in requests for remasters. And so much so, there was a father and son operation. So much so, if I remember correctly, that the son spent most of his time on the road buying pressing equipment all over the United States. And I always wondered what happened to that thing. Is it still going? And then now with film, there's just something, I guess. I always said that your generation somehow like hopscotched backwards into your grandparents and great grandparents thing. I mean, the smell of film with a halogen bulb, and that's that sound, that click, 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 click noise. My brother is nearing 60 now, my younger brother. And we've been talking about digitizing our dad's 8mm movies. He was an excellent cameraman too, by the way, for a hobbyist. And but he said, even though we have, we're going to digitize them for safety, but I prefer to just, hang the sheet up on a wall and get out the old Keystone projector, thread the reels, and that click and that smell of the cordite from the wrinkle finish on, I mean, that projector is 60 years old, and maybe 70 years old. And he said, it's a throwback. It's not just visual, it's smell, it's sound, not the sound of the movie, but another sound, an ambient sound. Why is it then that the Gen Xers seem to want to go back to this nostalgic time that they probably only heard of but never really experienced?
Well, I think for some of us, we were thrifting culture as youth. We were going to the thrift stores and we were buying vintage LPs for cheap. We were buying vintage clothes for cheap. And the Gen Xers that used to do that kind of thing did have vintage aesthetics and got into vintage films. I mean, there were some people who were into the classic film era. There were some people who were more into 70s film. And we were able to shop from what the older generation thought was detritus, and it appealed to us, and the imagery was strong. You could choose from acting. There was the stylized acting, the natural acting, and some of the things that had kind of been marketed or tossed aside as being old, we didn't see as old. It was new to us, and we enjoyed it, and we liked it. And you don't often get on the classic side, you get the movie stars. And today, sometimes there are certain actors that they do a good job, but they're kind of interchangeable. But the stars of yesteryear, whether they fell into their characters or they were their persona in the characters, they just were so strong in their presence and their look. Nobody looked like them. And if they did look like them, they weren't pursued for the screen because they looked too much like a copycat. They were looking for faces. They were looking for voices. They were looking for people with presence and charisma. And even to talk on the musical side, but I remember in the 90s, I went through the lounge phase, and I was buying a lot of lounge records like Martin Denny and different things that were like exotica. And some of the boomers were like, why do you want to listen to that? That's the stuff that rock and roll got rid of. And I liked rock and roll too. And I went through listening to a lot of punk and Riot Girl and all that kind of stuff. But I just saw this as another genre that I could enjoy, that could offer something to me. I didn't have a prejudice against it. I didn't have a prejudice against the film. I feel like for people who were younger than Gen X, that maybe Tumblr helped introduce them to some of the classic films and things, because that site was so strong on sharing imagery. It was there were people who used it for words and writing, but it was more about resharing images and looking for potent images. And so I think some of the younger generation, like the potent imagery they were seeing, and then went to go see it on film. Those mise en scene where the shots are really planned, they have an impact, what's in it, the colors, how the person was presented with the makeup, the hair, all of that. There's an appeal of those images from the past.
Yeah, that most of the we the term was typecast, but they're typecast as archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Edward G. Robinson. I mean, he was typecast as the the tough guy, the bad guy, and sometimes there were crossovers. I mean, of all names to bring up, Jerry Lewis, as a dramatic actor, was bloody, outright scary. The total opposite of the comedic actor. And then, and I guess it's part and parcel with this fascination with mid 20th century anything.
Mm-hmm.
Even down to Christmas trees. I mean, there's the people buying the pink trees and the aluminum trees with the rotating light on it. And I can understand, my nostalgia going back, bubble lights on a tree. But it really does amaze me. Now, have you looked into the amount of actors and actresses that came, today Actors covers it, that came out of this area? I mean, there was a slew of them. Plus there was a connection in Fairhaven, the Millicent Rogers went out with Errol Flynn. That's why his boats were at what was Dan Kelly shipyard. I mean, it's just amazing the amount, the personages that came through this area. Have you run across any?
Well, Clara Bow was not just in New Bedford. I don't think. I think she was also in Fairhaven. I know there was some filming of Down to the Sea in ships in Fairhaven as well as New Bedford. And I've started going through the Fairhaven Star, looking up film and movie. And I came across a listing about a silent film production company headed by a woman that was founded in Fairhaven. And I had never heard of her. And I want to dig more into, did her production company really make films? So exploring the local area is a new project for me. I want to find out more about what happened here in the past. When I was living in Rio Vista, California, I started exploring that area's film history. I was living in a former silent film museum there on the second floor with my husband, and then eventually my son. And I looked into the history of the theater, and I looked into some of the movies that had been filmed in that area. And I was published in a regional magazine called Discover Rio Vista, in addition to putting some things on my blog, Spellbound with Beth Ann. And now I want to do the same thing with Fairhaven. That's going to be a 2024 project, looking more into Fairhaven film history. I also know there's an out-of-print book on 20th century movie houses in the greater New Bedford area. And I've borrowed it once from a library and flipped through it a little bit, but my time ran out with it again, and I want to take that book out again, because that man did a lot of great research. Unfortunately, he's now passed, and I don't think his family is republishing the book. It was a self-published book, and it was bound more like a print shop book than a formal publisher book. And I'm trying to think if the name is, I think, Gargantus. I think it's Gargantus, the author's last name. And so between the Fairhaven Star and his book and what I can find out from other newspaper archives, that's the 2024 project I really want to do.
Yeah, the tentacles of this area are just phenomenal. I was speaking with Naomi Slip, the curator at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and we came to the conclusion that, oh my God, if it wasn't New Bedford going out into the world doing something, it was the world coming into New Bedford. Nelson Eddy, I'll be calling you, the Canadian love song. I mean, he was a New Bedford native. The woman, I think she was, her father was a manager at Wings department store. I don't remember her name now off the top of my head. She choreographed Gene Kelly's dance routines, I believe, the most famous being Singing in the Rain. And it goes on and on. And that part and parcel, that is what the index is all about. It seemed like a simple idea at the time. Jeff and I thought, hey, yeah, it's pretty cool. It was during the recession and we were trying to stay busy. It was, if you read the About section on our webpage, it was from a newspaper clipping by Mary Jean Blasdale, who was the then curator at the museum. And she was looking for painters specifically. Her book covered from 1749 to 1949. And she just wanted to include everyone, that had a viable, they fit a criteria as a professional artist, not, your grandma doing painting on glass, which my grandmother painted on glass. And, but why is that important? Why is it important? I mean, because you are going into the past. Why, from your point of view, is this so important to you?
Well, I think it's very important to understand our history. A lot of history gets lost because it depends. Were they able to have a voice and be a storyteller? Was there somebody who was able to almost be their champion in a way to keep their story going? A lot of people don't know that in the silent era, there were women and people of color who were directors, who were studio founders, who were writers, who were producing so much content. The banks helped push them out later, and also with silence later, the studios wanted to move on with sound. So they actually made comical movies that sped up the silence with an announcer who would mock what was on screen to convince people they were more modern than the people before and the media they had consumed before. And so that was a negative spin that helped kill a lot of history. And for those of us who appreciate the past, it kind of shows us what's possible and to honor who came before, and then to help us think about what we can do in the future too. For the Millicent Library, he wasn't local, but there's Oscar Michaud, and I want to show within our gates on that, because here was a Black-owned studio. He was the producer, the director. He was based out of state. And a lot of people don't know that someone like that was making movies and had a voice and was sharing what was the Black condition then. And I think people today can still relate to what was going on in those movies now and what was being said in those movies then. And if you can see something is the same that still needs to be changed, let's get moving forward and help that be a motivator to see that in 1925 somebody had a voice and he was saying this.
Yeah, it was. And before I forget, Jeff Ainsley is looking to do a project with silence, scoring for silence. And on that note, I think his name may have been Ed DeRocher. He was the music teacher at the Elmer M. Pool School in Dartmouth. We were the last graduating class of the Elmer M. Pool School that was on the cusp of middle schools. They went over to middle schools after that. But he, in his youth, had been, yeah, I'm old. He, in his youth, had been a silent movie house piano player. And he would regale us with, and he could always do the dun, 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 the ice flow music. And it was multidimensional. It was brand new. It evolves from theater, from live theater. Of course, the audio segment, it wasn't until they figured out how to not only add audio, but sync it. And then we just think of MGM and 20th Century and the big houses, but we don't think about the local producers. When you said that you ran across a woman producer, director, production owner in Fairhaven, that's a jaw drop, because on the prejudice of the time, a woman, and then you're talking about a person of color. So it looked like it was a great equalizer. And then, of course, they were all working at a disadvantage. And the disadvantage was that they weren't in Southern California, where the only reason why, or perhaps one of the only reason why, that became the epicenter of movie making was because of the climate.
Well, and the other thing was that a lot of people don't know, filmmaking kind of became guerrilla style. Edison patented the machinery. And so he wanted anybody who used a movie camera to film a film that had his technology to pay him license fees. And so not only did people like California because of the climate and because of the light, but the early waves of people were fleeing Edison and his men so that they didn't have to pay him and that they could make money off of their movies and not Edison.
Well, I always used to play this trick on my marketing classes at UMass and say, okay, what was Edison's greatest invention? And they would say the light bulb. And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, something else? Well, it was a great invention, but you have to realize you can't use a light bulb unless there's electricity. Now, on the other side of that, he figured out a way how to deliver electricity from a generator to homes. His biggest issue was, of course, AC versus DC, or DC versus AC, which is all, the electrifying the elephant and all that other crazy stuff that went along with it. But it was a period of time where not only, for example, not only was he an incredible inventor, but he also had an incredibly sharp business mind, I remember speaking to, I believe it was Barney Zeitz. He's a sculptor in Fall River, but it must have been his great-grandfather, who was also Barney. I forgot how many Zeitz brothers there were. There may have been 3. In fact, the Zeitz building is on Market Street, across from the Dunkin' Donuts. And I remember when I was working for the Office of Historic Preservation, when I first got out of grad school, I went to go see Mr. Zeitz to talk about the Zeiterion. And oh my God, talk about a traveling history book and talking about business acumen. There was a theater in Maine or New Hampshire that had, while the Zeiterion was under construction, and the Zeiterion, I think, is a 1,200 seat house, and it was state of the art, but they had, because of the heavy snowfall, they had a roof collapse. So the Zeitz brothers went, okay, we're right in the middle of construction. They put in all steel beams as a result of that other theater owner's lesson, and invited the public to come and see. And that theater is still phenomenal. I mean, to see how it has survived. And I'm wondering if the wall still exists where everybody signed their name.
That
Georgie
could
Jessel.
be.
Yeah, Georgie Jessel. I mean, you name the personage of the time, and they were in a city. Another thing also was Lincoln Park. Anybody that was anybody went to Lincoln Park. So there was Yakov Smirnov, the Russian immigrant comic, One of his shticks was, in America you go out looking for party. In my country, party come looking for you. So on that vein, Hollywood, Broadway, it all came into the city. There was no, and because I'm going on this complete mind pinball journey. I remember when Devo and that period of time, these guys were not playing the massive 30,000, 40,000, 100,000 seat stadiums. They were playing small venues. They brought music, top tier music into small clubs again. And same thing with music, with the theater. I mean, they went to the multiplexes. And okay, you get comfy seats and blah, 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 but it just wasn't the same. Of course, I remember paying 35 cents to get into the theater. And my stepmom, I still have some of her pieces of glass. There were premium days where they would give you something to come to the movies during the Depression. And the theaters in this city, what a sin, what a shame. The Zeiterion, thankfully, is still there. The Orpheum, they've got to do something. The Royale was next door. That's gone. The Royal. The Empire, the Olympia, my God, what kind of insanity taking that down. And these were all live theater houses at one time. The Capitol, which was when I lived up the north end of the city on Earl Street, was just up the street. A couple streets over on Dean and Acushnet.
And I'm old enough that I still remember more than one iteration of the Bijou in Fairhaven. That looks poised to become a gym now. When I was young, I remember it as a art movie theater place, and it was run by a friend's mother, Evelyn Baum. And then later, it became a second-run movie theater, and you could watch movies for $2 a pop. And eventually it became a stage
and all the
theater.
snacks were $1, right?
Yeah.
I watched Dances with Wolves there, and I learned a very valuable lesson. Oh. Don't go to the theater during school vacation.
Yeah.
But, and again, in speaking with you, you're getting, I'm seeing things, connections and such. This trend towards a more personalized, less sanitized digital music or CDs and stream. It's so clean. It's so sanitized. People like to hear that needle drop and that's, they like that. Trying to think of the name of the guy, the modern day jukebox. Pink Martini. I mean, that's one of the modern day jukebox.
Scott Bradley's postmodern.
Scott Bradley's postmodern jukebox. Exactly. Mm-hmm. That was the first time I heard Puddles the Clown. Mm-hmm. And there are some of these performers are so much into their role as lounge singers, torch singers, that I'm like, how old is this person? And they are totally immersed in that entire lifestyle. It's just, I think what I'm trying to get at, in a world of mass everything, it seems like your generation and probably the following generations want a little more of a personal experience. They want a smaller house venue where they can see the performer without using binoculars. They want the whole human experience.
Well, and I would say, like, during my youth, the small venues were where I got to see people because I was young and that's what I could afford. And mm-hmm. I used to go to places like Club Babyhead to see the modern bands and to dance at the techno nights. And then later, when I was briefly in Western Mass, I joined the Flywheel Arts Collective, and I became a booker there. And I was booking electronic music acts and occasionally booking a film night. And there was an electronic brother duo out there who were running a band called Natu at the time. And we became kind of like really good friends, and we became like a booking block where if we weren't excited about something, we would give our night up to the other one to book. And we ended up booking a 3-day electronic music festival called Integrated Electronic Living. And we had people from all over the Northeast, from New York City and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, Western Mass, all come in and do like experimental music, especially experimental dance music. And that was so much fun. I think as a Gen Xer, you can, we got, some of us got really used to niching down, and I joke that you can go to Providence, Rhode Island and find some guy that only likes krautrock from 1977 to 1979. That guy is probably out there.
Yeah, or some guy who's into Norwegian ska or something.
Yeah.
People are just taking what it is now in film and in filmmaking. Indie is becoming, I mean, the Blair Witch Project, which was, it took everybody by total surprise. I think $30,000 to produce this thing, where it was like 1/10 of 1% or something of what a normal movie costs. But more and more, I mean, we have. I just recorded her this week, Alyssa Botello. In fact, she's dropping because we hit the end of our reserve. She's dropping on Monday. She'll be the last podcast that we do for the 2023. She's not the only one. We've got Ethan Diagiar. We have there's probably about 5 of them. I'm blanking out on the other people's names right now. Well, there's Dan Burton. He's been around for a while. How does this fit into your agenda? This new locally produced stuff.
I'm excited to learn more about it. I went to the Sweet Freedom fundraiser, Alyssa Botello's film's fundraiser that she's working on at the town hall, and I got to see a lot of the indie shorts by the local independent filmmakers. And it's exciting to see that that's here. And it's almost going back to what people had during the silent era, where they had a lot of regional filmmaking. And with the technology being more accessible, with it being cheaper, with people shooting movies on iPhone with programs like Filmic and having gimbals and for their phone and things like that, there really is a chance for regional filmmaking to come about if the filmmakers are given the chance to grow and market and become savvy about how to exist outside of the studio system and get that support locally, and perhaps someday even work inside the studio system. One of my writing projects has been the Loser World Cinema Blogathon, where I started it with a Brazilian film writer, Leticia Magalhães, and we focus on the contributions of Lusophones or Lusitanics and their descendants to world cinema. And seeing some of those films at the town hall, I really got excited because the Portuguese or the Portuguese American voice in American cinema isn't really represented well. It's usually represented by other people who are not from the background or not from the heritage, and they usually cast people who are not from the background and not from the heritage. So I think it will be really interesting to see if we get a filmmaker outside of this area, they don't have to pigeonhole themselves, but if they brought out a film that had the Portuguese American experience out, that would really be contributing something to American cinema. You get something like Mystic Pizza, which helped launch Julia Roberts, that also had Lily Taylor and Annabeth Gish, and it's written from somebody not from the background, but it was really appreciated to have any kind of portrayal. People here were so excited to have any kind of representation, modern representation on the screen. There were some things that were a little odd about the film. Like they had a character who said that her father had a dream in Portugal about the pizza sauce, which didn't really make sense because they were just serving Italian pizza in the film with linguiça on it. If it had been some kind of more like modern day crossover where there was an intersection of the pizza with a Portuguese element, like out here, I've had what was it? I've had chicken Mozambique on a pizza, and that was delicious. But I got really excited at that screening at the town hall because I thought if one of them can do it, then maybe there'll be Portuguese American characters that actually are more authentic on the screen that come out. When I talk about the classic films, there are people like Edward G. Robinson who did a really good portrayal in Tiger Shark, and he plays a Portuguese American fisherman in it. He doesn't do that accent quite right, but he was from Europe. His native language was Romanian, so he does a Latin accent when he's speaking, and it's one that's easily understood. But again, there's little differences between like finding good portrayals and finding good and accurate portrayals.
Well, it was also too. Don't forget that the casting was bizarre. They would cast Japanese people as Chinese people. They would cast Chinese people as Japanese people.
They still do.
They would cast some Chinese people as indigenous Americans. American Indians. It was a complete mishmash. One of my favorite go-to movies, is because a lot of my personal experiences are very much reflected in that movie, believe it or not, mostly with Jamie when he finds his brother in his house with his girlfriend, and he goes to France and has the Portuguese housekeeper Aurelia. Well, I lived in Portugal for a year in Figueira da Foz, which, by the way, there's a very active community out there as well. I'm constantly trying to make the connections over here. It is a sister city to New Bedford, but the part is the proposal, which was instantaneous, which reflects exactly what happened with my wife and I in Portugal. But the whole thing was so well done. All the actors were Portuguese. And even their attitudes is unbelievable. It's like, is Aurelia here? Quem quer saber? Who wants to know? Right. Or I come here to ask her to marry me. You can't marry her. She's my best employee. I mean, it was so typical. And then the sister. Okay. I mean, so it was so well done. Now, compare that to Apaixonada, which you got a Greek woman, and there was a lot of, it's just not the same. I mean, it's just not the same. No,
and it was very typical, with what they do with casting. The lead actress in Apaixonada was beautiful. She was Greek, and I think also
she was in Providence, wasn't she?
Yeah,
the series Providence.
Yep, and then like the movie Fairhaven, which was filmed in Fairhaven, I believe that the person who plays the Portuguese mother in that movie was Greek as well. So it's kind of typical to cast somebody to play somebody Portuguese who is some other Southern European descendant, or sometimes Jewish, or sometimes Irish, and they curl up the hair and darken the hair.
Well, it's interesting. Because now Portugal's really come into its own. Lisbon is the fourth most sought after city in Europe, a destination city, or it's among the four. And the battle goes on between Porto and Lisbon as to the greatest tourism cities. So the Portuguese are finally coming into their own, and but all of this stuff, because we got to start wrapping this up pretty soon. What's going on now and what's coming up that's big? Something that really makes your heart pound. Not, oi, why did I do this?
Well, I'm getting really excited for South Coast Cinemaniacs. It's a vision I had when I was moving from California. I used to be a president of a classic film club in the Sacramento area. Originally, it was born out of Turner Classics Movies local chapters program, where they were encouraging people to join their fan club backlot, and then they were encouraging people to form their own local chapters, and there were different perks of being in a local chapter. And I wasn't the first president that founded the Sacramento area chapter, but I was the second one, and I was the one when it transitioned, when the local chapters program ended, and we stayed on as our own club. And it was so nice to find that community, because I was a transplant in California. I'm a Fairhaven native, and now I'm a returned Fairhaven native. I had a baby during the pandemic, and I moved back to my coronial to Fairhaven. But that classic film club helped provide me a community out in Sacramento, as somebody who worked in a traveling job, who didn't go to the same place every day for work. And now that I'm back here, reintegrating myself after being 21 years away and seeing what's the same and what's changed, this classic film club that I've founded in partnership with the Millicent Library, it's helping me get back into the community and to contribute again in some way to my local community and meet people. And I'm having so much fun curating the movies that are shown there. And I'm also getting members involved with helping with what we're going to see. It's a couple of times I had them do a blind vote where I described the movies and said, which one would you like to see next month? And they voted. But I've been getting a lot of requests from Hitchcock, which I love Hitchcock. I love Hitchcock, and I love Chabrol. And there's a part of the reason why my blog has the word Spellbound, and it is a tribute to Hitchcock, even though his movie Spellbound is not my favorite film. So to have people getting excited to see these films for the first time, to be making this local group and help contribute in my own way to the film culture of Fairhaven, it's just great. And it's been a good experience so far. And I look forward to what the group growing and what we can do with the group in the coming new year. And I really am looking forward to some writing time in the new year to work on exploring Fairhaven and this local area's film history, and to just write in general in the films. That being the mom of a toddler and having elderly parents, so not a lot of childcare assistance, and my husband is the one working full time, and he's been in working a lot on his business. And to have that writing time, it's not just a room of one's own for the writing. It's having the moments and the time to think and to come up with the ideas and to research the ideas. That I'm really going to be booking some time for that in the new year, and I hope people will check out the blog and Spellbound with Beth Ann and the film club as well. We'll be having silence, and we'll be having talkies as well at the film club.
What was that last thing?
We'll be having silence as well as talkies.
Talkies. I thought you said hockeys. It's like, okay, I'm not familiar with that term. Yeah. So
just a little film nerd joke.
yeah, the good old talkies. Yeah. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on to our podcast. I'd love to have you back. And at some point in time, if the gods of grants deem it so, it would be wonderful if you could head up the podcast strictly for local history, using us as a platform to not only to distribute what you've found, but also to use it to draw in more information, because one of our part of our agenda is to try to identify everyone that we possibly can from the South Coast, and that jumps the line to Adamsville, Little Compton, or Tiverton. Adamsville, Tiverton, and Little Compton, because that was the old demarcation of the area before Rhode Island gobbled up those other counties, or that county rather. We're going to try to resurrect every visual, performing, literary, and even, believe it or not, culinary artist that we possibly can. And it's with DEI being in the crosshairs of the people who always put everything in the crosshair. The diversity, inclusion, and equity is really super important, because there are people who had a modicum of success within their own small circle. My mother, for example, was a father singer. And she sang all the way from Lowell, Chicopee. In fact, we were on a road, and I'm out there going, "Oh my God, how the heck did she get out here?" I mean, by car, it's a long trip, but all the way down to Newark and Elizabeth, New Jersey. And I was shocked when I picked up the picture history, because that pictorial was the original title, and they kiboshed it. The picture history of New Bedford. I believe it was the first volume. Anyway, I was looking for something else completely, and what did I see? I saw a notation about my mother being the only documented father singer from that generation,
Wow.
which was like a mind-blowing thing. And I know there are other people, but the point of this is that there are so many people who either went out into the world and made something of themselves, in whatever genre or whatever discipline, and came back, or they had something going here. Just the Cape Verdean community alone, oh my God, I mean, it's like the amount of talent in all of those categories is like over the top. And then now,
when I used to work at Baker Books, there was this woman who came in who was a big band singer on the radio. And here she came in shopping for books as an elderly woman. And I really wish that she had come back, because I wanted to know more of her story.
Was Paula Daigle working there when you were working there?
Yes, we crossed over. Yes.
Yeah. She was well, she grew up across the street from my old house in New Bedford. Her dad and I have known each other for years. I used to be his boss on the Historic Buildings Survey of the Office of Historic Preservation. But yeah, it's really, really important to preserve the past, because the African proverb does hold true: when someone dies, a library burns down. And we are only as good as the lessons that we've learned from the past, that's for sure. Thank you so much. And I'm going to wrap this up. Well, folks, thank you for joining us for another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index. And until the next time, be kind to each other out there, and just have fun. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.